Street art is visual art created in public locations, usually unsanctioned artwork executed outside of the context of traditional art venues. The term gained popularity during the graffiti art boom of the early 1980s and continues to be applied to subsequent incarnations. Stencil graffiti, wheat-pasted poster art, sticker art, and street installation sculpture are common forms of modern street art. Video projection, yarn bombing, and lock-on sculpture became popularized at the turn of the 21st century. The terms urban art, guerrilla art, post-graffiti, and neo-graffiti are also sometimes used when referring to artwork created in these contexts. Traditional spray-painted graffiti artwork itself is often included in this category, excluding territorial graffiti, a pure vandalism. Street art is often motivated by a preference on the part of the artist to communicate directly with the public at large, free from perceived confines of the formal art world. Street artists sometimes present socially relevant content infused with aesthetic value, to attract attention to a cause or as a form of art provocation. Street artists often travel between countries to spread the designs. Some artists have gained cult followings, media and art world attention, and have gone on to work commercially in the styles which made the work known on the streets. Background: artists have challenged art by situating it in non-art contexts. Street artists do not aspire to change the definition of an artwork, but rather to question the existing environment with its own language. The motivations and objectives that drive street artists are as varied as the artists themselves. Street artists attempt to have the work communicate with everyday people about socially relevant themes in ways that are informed by aesthetic values without being imprisoned by them. There is a strong current of activism and subversion in urban art. Street art can be a powerful platform for reaching the public and a potent form of political expression for the oppressed, or people with little resources to create change. Common variants include ad-busting, subvertising and other culture jamming, the abolishment of private property and reclaiming the streets. Some street artists used smart vandalism as a way to raise awareness of social and political issues. Other street artists simply see urban space as an untapped format for personal artwork, while others may appreciate the challenges and risks that are associated with installing illicit artwork in public places. A universal motive of most, if not all, street art is that adapting visual artwork into a format which utilizes public space allows artists who may otherwise feel disenfranchised to reach a much broader audience than traditional artwork and galleries normally allow, whereas traditional graffiti artists have primarily used freehand aerosol paints to produce the works. Street art encompasses many other media and techniques, including lead art, mosaic tiling, murals, stencil art, sticker art, lock-on, street sculptures, street installations, wheat pasting, wood blocking, and yarn bombing. New media forms such as projection onto large city buildings are an increasingly popular tool for street artists, and the availability of cheap hardware and software allows street artists to become more competitive with corporate advertisements. Much like open-source software, artists are able to create art for the public realm from the personal computers, similarly creating things for free which compete with companies making things for profit. Street art is a topical issue. Some people consider it a crime, others consider it a form of art. Street artists may be charged with vandalism, malicious mischief, intentional destruction of property, criminal trespass, or antisocial behavior. Legal definitions vary between jurisdictions. Some in society have transitioned from disdain to quiet acceptance. In some quarters, acceptance has morphed into outright love, instigating a race to purchase this urban craft. In some cities, it is unlawful for landowners to allow any graffiti on the property if it's visible from any other public or private property. Origins, slogans of protest and political or social commentary graffitied onto public walls are the precursor to modern graffiti and street art, and continue as one aspect of the genre. Street art in the form of text to simple iconic graphics in the vein of corporate icons become well-known yet enigmatic symbols of an area or an era. Some credit the Kilroy was here graffiti of the World War II era as one such early example, a simple line drawing of a long-nosed man peering from behind a ledge. Author Charles Panarti indirectly touched upon the general appeal of street art in his description of the Kilroy graffiti as outrageous not for what it said, but where it turned up. Much of what can now be defined as modern street art has well-documented origins dating from New York City's graffiti boom, with its infancy in the 1960s, maturation in the 1970s, and peaking with the spray-painted full-car subway train murals of the 1980s centered in the Bronx. As the 1980s progressed, a shift occurred from text-based works of early in the decade to visually conceptual street art such as Richard Hambleton's shadow figures. These years coincide with Keith Haring's subway advertisement subversions and Jean-Michel Basquiat's Samo tags. What is now recognized as street art had yet to become a realistic career consideration, and offshoots such as stencil graffiti were in their infancy. Wheat-pasted poster art used to promote bands and the clubs where they performed evolved into actual artwork, copy art, and became a common sight during the 1980s in cities worldwide. The group working collectively as Avant were also active in New York during this period. Punk rock music's subversive ideologies were also instrumental to street art's evolution as an art form during the 1980s. Some of the anti-museum mentality can be attributed to the ideology of F.D. Marinetti, who in 1909 wrote the Manifesto of Futurism. A famous quote from that book said, "We will destroy all the museums." Many street artists claim we do not live in a museum, so art should be in public places with no tickets. Early iconic works, the northwest wall of the intersection at Houston Street and the Bowery in New York City, has been a target of artists since the 1970s. The site, now sometimes referred to as the Bowery mural, originated as a derelict wall which graffiti artists used freely. Keith Haring once commandeered the wall for his own use in 1982. After Haring, a stream of well-known street artists followed, until the wall had gradually taken on prestigious status. By 2008, the wall became privately managed and made available to artists by commission or invitation only. A series of I Am the Best Artist René murals painted by René Moncada began appearing on the streets of Soho in the late 1970s. René has described the murals as a thumb in the nose to the art community he felt it helped pioneer, but by which he later felt ignored. Recognized as an early act of art provocation, they were a topic of conversation and debate at the time, and related legal conflicts raised discussion about intellectual property, artists' rights, and the First Amendment. The ubiquitous murals also became a popular backdrop to photographs taken by tourists and art students, and for advertising layouts and Hollywood films. IATBA murals were often defaced, only to be repainted by René. Exhibitions. In 1981, Washington Project for the Arts held an exhibition entitled Street Works, which included urban art pioneers such as John Fechner, Fab Five Freddy and Lee Quinones working directly on the streets. Thechner, who once defined street art as all art on the street that's not graffiti, is included in C.D. Lewison's book Street Art: The Graffiti Revolution, which accompanied the 2008 street art exhibition at the Tate Modern in England, of which Lewison was the curator. Commercial crossover. Some street artists have earned international attention for the work and have made a full transition from street art into the mainstream art world, some while continuing to produce art on the streets. Keith Haring was among the earliest wave of street artists in the 1980s to do so. Traditional graffiti and street art motifs have also increasingly been incorporated into mainstream advertising, with many instances of artists contracted to work as graphic designers for corporations. Graffiti artist Hayes has provided font and graphic designs for music acts such as the Beastie Boys and Public Enemy. Shepard Fairey's street posters of then presidential candidate Barack Obama were reworked by special commission for use in the presidential campaign. A version of the artwork also appeared on the cover of Time magazine. It is also not uncommon for street artists to start their own merchandising lines, as street art has become more accepted by the general public, most likely due to its artistic recognition and the high-profile status of Banksy and other graffiti artists. This has led street art to become one of the sights to see in many European cities. Some street artists now provide tours of local street art and are able to share the knowledge, explaining the ideas behind many works, the reasons for tagging and the messages portrayed in a lot of graffiti work. Berlin, London, Paris, Hamburg and other cities all have popular street art tours running all year round. In London alone there are supposedly 10 different graffiti tours you can go on. Many of these organizations such as Alternative London, Paris Street Art, Alternative Berlin, to name but a few, pride themselves on working with the local street artists, so visitors get an authentic experience and not just a rehearsed script. Many of these guides, artists are painters, fine art graduates and other creative professions that have found street graffiti a way to get their art out there. Now with this commercial angle they are able to let people into the world of street art and give them more of an understanding of where it comes from. Legality and ethics. There is a gap that developed between the old graffiti era of the 70s and 80s and the newer alluring street art. It has also brought on a new value to the art's dollar's worth and ensuing legal issues. There are legal complications and players include the artist, the city, a municipal government, the intended recipient, and the owner of the space such street art was displayed. The following is an example that occurred in 2014 in Bristol, England and henceforth expounds on the legal, moral, and ethical questions that resulted. It revolved around a piece of street art called Mobile Lovers by a famous resident called Banksy. It was painted on plywood on a public doorway, then cut out by a citizen who in turn was going to sell the piece to garner funds for a boys' club. The city government in turn confiscated the artwork and placed it in a museum. Banksy, hearing of the conundrum, then bequeathed it to the original citizen, thinking his intentions were genuine. The complex controversy of ownership and public property as well as trespassing and vandalism are issues to be resolved legally. Guerrilla sculpture. Guerrilla sculpture is the placement of sculptures in street settings without official approval. An example is the surreptitious overnight appearance of an unsanctioned sculpture of Edward Snowden onto a column in Fort Greene Park in New York. In other cases the sculptures integrate two-dimensional backdrops with a three-dimensional ingredient. Such a sculpture was one by Banksy titled Spy Booth in 2014. The backdrop was painted on a wall in Cheltenham, England and featured Cold War spy characters adorned in trench coats and fedoras. They had spy accoutrements, microphones and reel-to-reel tape decks. These characters were gathering intelligence from a broken telephone booth. A deviation from unsanctioned street sculpture is institutionalized guerrilla sculpture, which is sanctioned by civic authorities and can be commercialized. One such artist from the Netherlands is Florentin Hofman, who in 2007 created the rubber duck. It is a colossal rendition of the childhood tub toy with the distinction of being 26 by 20 by 32 meters. Hoffman calls it a social response.